I think you also ought to explain that actually doing the work is only a very small portion of what's going to be involved with interacting with an open source community. So to give you some resources to hopefully help you along here, teachingopensource.org is a great resource. There's a number of very dedicated professors, people in open source projects, and pessimistic people like me on their mailing list. I highly recommend, if you can go to a Posse, that you should certainly attend that. Aside from that, though, I think that your best resource is really an IRC client and a mail client. You ought to be joining a mailing list for a project. You ought to be hanging out in their IRC channel. See how friendly they are to newcomers. See how friendly they are to you. And go. Speaking of teachingopensource.org, Mel brought cards to tell you about teachingopensource.org. There's a stack there and there's a stack here. And if you have questions, we've got a few minutes now, and you're welcome to email me or talk to me on IRC. Yes, ma'am.
So my question is related to a point that you brought up early on in your presentation, which is that students need to be given projects that are not in the critical path for work, but they still need to be legitimate. And I'm wondering how you would go about finding such a project for your students, because one of the complaints that I heard very often about students participating in summer of code was that they were given work that wasn't in the critical path for all the reasons you mentioned.
Right.
And then they no longer felt incentivized to be a part of the community because they weren't contributing to the core. And is there a way to balance those needs for feeling integrated into the community with not getting in the community's way?
I think that there's two potential solutions. One of them is one that I wish Summer of Code adopted more, which is they have the mentor-mentee mentality, and I wish that was more the mentor is going to do this bit of work. Would you like to come participate along with the mentor? And often it's the mentor providing guidance as opposed to I'm doing the heavy lifting and you can help carry some of the load. Maybe there are mentoring organizations who do that. None of the ones I've been involved with, like Sahana or Fedora, tend to have that. They have these discrete projects. Go build an interface that allows me to create a Git repo from a website type of task set. I do think that it's a problem for retaining students. I don't think from the perspective of classwork that should matter, because students aren't going to stick around as the general rule. What was your finding with Summer of Code? Did people stick around?
So anecdotally, I don't actually have anything to measure this. About 25% of the projects involve so that they gain at least 3 or more new contributors to their participation, which I think is great.
Sure.
But it also depends on how they measure participation and what they feel a useful contribution is. I think if someone sticks around and answers newbie questions on the mailing list, that's a contribution, because the lead developers don't have to worry about answering those questions.
Sure.
But that being said, I guess my concern about what you just brought up about it should be anticipated that students will disappear anyway if it's related to coursework, is that seems to me that there would be less impetus on the part of open source projects to try and build up that rapport and mentorship with students if the assumption is going into it clearly with the mindset that in 3 months or in 6 months or however long, these students are just going to kind of float away.
I don't think that's been the experience of places like Seneca, who works heavily with Mozilla and Fedora. I think that there's still the expectation those students are going to go away, and I still think that they get lots of participation and lots of credibility within those communities. I may be wrong. I may be biased because I think some of the professors there are friends, and I think that they're doing awesome things. But in a lot of ways, they're also the ones driving that. So maybe they don't need the scaffolding from the community as much as a typical professor would. Mel, I see you raising your hand, so.
I actually wanted to respond to Leslie.
Sure.
So one of the things that one of us to the college always stuck with there's three kinds of projects. There's the type one, which is mission critical, live and die, and if you're a project or a company, that's what you want to put your paid engineer labor at. Because otherwise your program doesn't start as a success rather than you would do. Type three, the kind that no one cares about. Oh wait, you changed the color of a button we did. The second type is what you want students to involve, which is the stuff that if it doesn't get done, nothing's going to die. But if it happens, there's a chance to actually transform some part of the organization. So a good example from David, you mentioned the classic first year students. One of the things they did is they came into Fedora and they made up the microblogging strategy for us because we didn't really have like Fedora, the Twitter account, Fedora, the identical account. We just weren't doing marketing that way at all. So if they try to kind of flop, well, we didn't have one anyway. But we were able to get a little game plan in place. So now we're pushing out blog updates on Twitter, release information in Twitter, and it's benefited the project in a very visible way. So if you look for those things that might have a surprising effect, but they're not critical path, those make good student projects because they get kudos if it runs and they don't get beaten up by anyone else.
So you're saying high impact, low criticality,
Yeah.
and so to ask Leslie's question of you, how do you identify those?
Go on to all your students and others and say, so what do you wish you could work on, but you just don't have enough time to? You'll probably go, man, my life would be so much easier if this thing is that little thing, but it's taking you 5 hours to make out of that. And then you don't have just the project, you have a project, and you'll have an experienced developer with a vested interest in seeing that little mini project complete.
That's interesting.
So do you think anyone in the Fedora community would have identified setting up a microblogging strategy as something that they wanted to see happen?
I think there was. In Mel's specific instance, there were people who said, wow, I wish we could do this. And there were a number of other things like video strategy that class did as well. I will point out that those were successful, and I was not involved in those. The one I was involved in failed.
At last, we know the truth. Excellent.
There's my pessimism again. Anyone else have a question? Yes, sir.
I'm from academia. I teach software engineering. In fact, came to this conference last year and was inspired by Koenigsberg to use teaching open source in my senior level software engineering practicum, and I have 27 students here today.
Awesome.
From there, and they're each in teams of 3 or 4 working on a FOSS or HFOSS project. Okay? And so to me, you were slinging some mud. And what I would like to, instead of going negative, though,
Sure.
I would like to suggest that we start building some stashes of experiences that we can then mine for data that really will expose the facts about teaching open source.
Sure. I think that there needs to be positive. My concern was I'm coming in and there are giants here who are talking about education. There's Walter Bender, there's Mel Chua, and there's Leslie Hawthorne, who are all far superior speakers to me and have far greater experiences. I also see open source being touted as this wonderful thing to get people involved in it, and I wholeheartedly agree. And I don't want to sugarcoat that using open source as part of your curriculum is difficult, and I don't want people to be surprised by it, and I also don't want people to have to repeat the same mistakes. And I will take blame for most of the failures I've cited because they've largely involved me. And I don't think that it's, I think that failure is a good thing if you learn from it. And hopefully we have. I think certainly we've seen some evidence of our interaction with higher ed getting better. And so I don't mean to come off as overly negative, but I think there are certainly some mistakes we can learn from, and we don't learn from them if we don't talk about them.
No, I agree completely. What I'm looking though for is we start to expand this effort, right? And get more people involved. We need some statistics to help us learn about what's going on instead of just stories.
So what kind of statistics would you be interested in, and why would you be interested in them? Is it justification, or is it persuasion, or?
Well, my impression of the teaching open source movement here is that it's a good thing. We want to push forward. We want to be successful in getting open source taught in universities and colleges. So measuring that success is a statistic.
Okay.
Statistical study. How many places are doing it? Are there some postmortems that have been done about each case? And can these be accumulated somewhere in an open source way where others can view results and learn from them? That's what
I think teachingopensource.org is, as far as I know, that's the canonical place. There's no other big community out there, is there? I don't know that they're collecting active statistics. I will tell you that I see, in the course of the past month, I found out that there are 2 universities in South Carolina that I didn't know about pushing students into open source. I also see them running into a lot of these same problems, and really wish they would participate with. Really wish they would participate in some of these communities, and I think they would avoid that. But I don't know that there's an active statistics collection. I mean, it's kind of everybody knows everybody in that particular community.
Are you asking for actual statistics, or would use cases and lessons learned be more effective?
same thing. I mean, statistics can be gleaned from that kind of stuff. Well, just some sort of repository of experience.
Yeah, I mean, we can work on that.
But for example, I came last year, and the Connellsburg said I should talk to Mel, and I think I sent you an email, and I was encouraged to apply for a posse, which I did. It was going to be at Cornell or something like that. Filled out the whole thing, and never heard boo from anyone about it, and the next thing I know, the thing's been canceled. And I felt that there's something broken here. And
there is, and
so I just pushed forward anyway. I said, I'm going to do
Yeah.
this. It sounds like a good idea.
I'll tell you what the limiting factor is. The limiting factor is there's essentially been a single person who was running it. I take that back. It started out there was one person, and that was Greg. Then Greg spawned a Mel, and Mel started doing a ton of education work. And Greg ended up leaving Red Hat, and that left all of that weight of 2 people on Mel. And I think a lot of things have fallen down in the interim. There's just, quite honestly, more work than a single person can do. And I think some of that is being pushed out, and I don't want to speak for Mel, but there's a lot of, there seems to be a lot of things that were dropped and a lot of things that need to be picked up more timely.
Before we close, so
Sure.
to make sure that we've got a chance to say thank you very much.
Thank you for letting me come.
Continue this discussion.
Yeah. Go ahead, Leslie.
No, I actually wanted to just say I'd like to turn this challenge back around on you and ask you to be our first use case since you pushed it out on your own. And, yeah,
Thank you for driving that bus.
absolutely.